Hello! So this evening we are taking a look at the PMDG 737 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I'm doing this in response to an email I received this week, or a few emails actually, with somebody having a few problems with switching over between the guidance system of flying via the GPS and engaging ILS to come in for landing. So I'm going to do a complete flight and take the aeroplane all the way through from the ground at Stansted over to Rotterdam in the Netherlands. So we'll see how we get on with it. It should be fairly straightforward. So you can see Stansted is not the best weather, but that just makes it more interesting, I think. Let's go and get inside the cockpit out of the wind, and we'll have a look at our flight plan first. So we'll go over to Navigraph. So you can see we're going to leave Stansted on the Clacton 2E standard instrument departure. Then we're going to fly airways purely so we can see how to program airways. Now actually I'm not following the airways correctly, because you can see here the entry level onto L608 is actually 9,000 feet, but we'll be coming into Clacton at 6,000 feet. If we come and pull up the standard instrument departure plate, we're only at 6,000 feet, so we'll be coming in low. So in the real world, I don't imagine that would happen unless the controller obviously kept an eye on you to make sure there was no traffic above you as you climbed up into the airway. And then we're going into the COA VOR, and then following the standard instrument departure, the COA 2R arrival into standard instrument departure, did I just say? Sorry, the standard terminal arrival route into Rotterdam, and then the ILS approach into T4. Okay, so let's go and see how we program that. The easiest way to see the route actually in Navigraph is to click the pencil so you can see the routing instructions up here. And this will become obvious as we program it into the airplane. So I'm going to refer to my own notes for starting the 737 up. I'll try to remember to put a link to them in the video, in the notes of the video, so we'll see how we get on. So first things first, go overhead. Control 6 takes us overhead, and we go and switch the batteries on, and we cover the battery switch, and then we can go Control 3 to come down to the FMC, and we go to FS Actions, Ground Services, and we can request ground power. So while that's happening, we can go and have a quick look outside. Yeah, the cart is already there, the door is opened on the side of the plane, and there's the cable. So back on Control 3 will show us this, and that will change to release in a moment. Or I think it does. There we go. My memory isn't as bad as I thought it might be. Then we can go overhead, and we can switch over the aeroplane to use ground power. So we flick the ground power switch, and the aeroplane powers up using the ground power. So then Control 7 takes us further overhead, and we can go and we'll go and put the dome lights on. It's actually really horrible weather today, it's quite dark. We'll switch both of the IRS systems to NAV. So this is the inertial reference system. So the aeroplane figures out where it is by the accelerations that are happening to it. So that takes a while to align. It uses gyroscopes. So I think I've got it set to instant align, to be honest. So yeah, if we change this to heading STS, it shows you how many minutes if you've not got it on instant align. So we've got that done. We can press Control 6 now to come back down. We can go and arm the emergency lights and cover the switch on that. And then go and do the window heats and the probe heats. Oops, sorry, that's the test button for it. And there's the probe heats. What's next on our list? So we go and program the flight plan into the FMC. So it says enter IRS position in the message line or the scratch pad. The bottom line of the FMC doubles as the place you key things in and the place it tells you things. So enter IRS position. So we'll clear that out. So we need to come back to menu, go to the FMC, go to, it's saying nav data out of date, so my AirRack is not up to date. I don't think it's going to affect us, but just shows I think there must have been a Navigraph update, and I haven't done it yet. So position initialization. So I go next page, I pick up the GPS position into the scratch pad, I go previous page, and I can drop that into set IRS position, which makes it disappear, and it's now got that position. We can put our reference airport in, so Echo Golf Sierra Sierra is the ICAO code for Stansted. We'll drop that in. And then we can go to the route page, and it will be in the scratch pad already, so we can drop that into the origin, and then we can put in the destination. So if we have a quick look at Navigraph, we're going to Echo Hotel Romeo Delta, which is Rotterdam. Echo Hotel Romeo Delta. Okay, so we can put a flight number in if we want, so we'll put one in, VFL123. And just for interest's sake, I'm going to come over to the tablet, go to the EFB, and I'm going to request the data from SimBrief. I have programmed this into SimBrief, so we at least get the data in here, which is quite useful. It's nice to see that we can have the operational flight plan here, and we can refer to it. So if I think we have to use the scroll bar here. I've gone too far. There we go, there's the route. So, runway, we're taking off from runway 22 from Stansted. Okay, so to do the route, before we do the SID or the star, we go to the next page on the route page. And we can put in the legs of the route. So if we go and have a look at Navigraph, after we do the standard instrument departure, we begin our actual route at the Clacton VOR. So we put in Clacton first, so CLN into the scratchpad, and we put in airways on the left and waypoints on the right. So Clacton goes in, and it will put direct in for the moment. That will get replaced by a SID in a few moments' time. So once we leave Clacton, we take L608 to Saski. So airway L608 to Saski. And drop that in. And then once we've done that, we take L179 to Koa. So L179 is the next airway, and that takes us to Koa. And that is the end of our route, because following that we've got the standard terminal arrival route into Rotterdam. Okay, so we can activate that plan and execute it. Okay, so that's got our active route, and notice now the FMC is helping us. It knows there's like a flow it will take you through, with the bottom right key typically in a Boeing taking you to the next thing you need to do. So the performance initialization. So we can put in our gross weight, or we can calculate zero fuel weight automatically, and that will fill it in for us. So I'm just going with the fuel that's in the aeroplane. I think PMDG half fill the plane, which will be more than enough. Reserves, will put 1 in. I've had a little look at the operational flight plan already, and it wanted a cost index of 66. We are going to cruise at 15,000 feet. And transition altitude, today, I've already looked at the chart, it's 6,000 feet. Okay, and I don't think we need to do much else. I'm not sure if this will pre-calculate the wind for us, probably won't. We can go and fetch the wind, but I'm not going to bother for today's flight, because we're looking more about the guidance, not about doing things absolutely by the book. So N1 limits, so you can obviously change the performance of the aeroplane. Go on to the takeoff parameters, so we're going to put flaps at 10 degrees. That calculates us the rotation speeds, so we can confirm them. And that's essentially it for the routing and the performance. So now we're over to the SID and the star. So the depart button, go to the dep for Stansted. It already knows runway 22. We're going to be doing the Clacton 2E standard instrument departure. So we can execute that. You find that when you talk to the real 737 pilots, some companies like you to confirm every page as you do it, so when the execute button comes up when you've made a change. Other companies, because it will remember all of your changes, other companies aren't so hot on that, and they'll let you make a raft of changes and then execute at the end. But I actually like to do it bit by bit and execute each change I'm making, just because then I know I've done it. So index, we can go to EHRD and arrive. We're going to come in ILSC on runway 24, and we're going to use the Koa 2R standard terminal arrival route. There aren't any transitions there. I think we might have DOFMU though here. Let's just go and double check that. Yeah, we're using DOFMU as our... oh, I think so, yes. So there is a transition on the approach, so execute that. And then go to the next page, because we're essentially done at this point. for the routing. So we need to flick through though and make sure that there aren't any discontinuities. Are there going to be any? No, it's all looking good. Okay, so you wouldn't expect there to be discontinuities if you know that the SID has met the airways and the star has met the airways and the approach meets the star. So that has proven that we don't have any discontinuities. Okay, so the next thing to do, I'm just trying to think if there's anything left to do. Oh yes, we can do a gross check of the flight plan. So if we go and switch the navigation display into plan mode. So this isn't actually on my checklist, it's just a nice thing to do. When you switch to plan mode, you'll see the center marker turns up on the legs page and the step option on the bottom right soft key. So you can press the step button to step through your flight plan to make sure it looks good. So you can obviously check this against your charts if you had them in your hand. And you can see here we come up the standard terminal arrival route into the approach. That all looks great. Okay, so we can put this back into map mode, and we probably want to press legs to come back to the top of the legs page. You can see the system is already aligned. The screens are a bit bright, so let's go and turn the brightness down so they don't completely blind us, so we can actually read the numbers on them. The backup attitude indicator is just as bad, isn't it? So we'll click the minus button a few times on it. If you want to make because it's quite a dull day today, if we want to brighten up some of the panel backlighting, we can. So that this is the backlighting of the writing. So if you do this, you'll just see it's just coming up a bit brighter around where the writing is, making things easier to spot. Okay, so what's after the flight plan? The MCP, Control 1, takes us to the master control panel for the autopilot. So we're going to go and pre-configure the speed, and we can set the course as well. So I think general practice is you would make the course match the runway direction for the immediate takeoff. So 222 is the actual runway direction here at Stansted. So just pulling the course around on both sides. This is just in case you had GPS failure and you needed to start doing radio navigation and taking account of everything. So same goes for the heading. The speed you're going to go and preset to the first target, so 210. And heading we've already done. We'll go and set the altitude immediately for our cruise, and there's a reason we're going to do that. It's just to illustrate something. So we're setting altitude to 15,000 feet, but we're going to go LNAV. Oh, before we can do that, we have to turn the flight directors on. I always forget this. Once the flight director's on, and once you've got a complete route, you can engage LNAV. You can pre-engage it on the ground, and you can pre-engage VNAV. Okay, so you often see pilots will usually take off and fly. They might fly this first turn by hand. We're going to deliberately switch the autopilot on early to see if it will let us. Okay, so we zoomed right into 5 miles range on this to get a good look of what's going on. It is going to be a bit of a race against time to put the autopilot on that early, but we'll see if it will let us. Okay, so I think that's most things done there. Because what the thought is, as soon as we come off the ground, as soon as I engage autopilot, the number should disappear on the speed. We can engage the auto throttle, we can switch it on at least now. We're not using it yet, but we can power it up. Yeah, so the thought is as soon as we switch on the autopilot, that number should disappear because we are in VNAV mode. So it will be using these speeds. Okay. So we need to press B to set the calibrate the barometric pressure on the altimeters. And then we get on with the rest of the process. So overhead we go and put the seatbelt signs to auto, put the chimes to on, and turn on the yaw dampers. set the cabin pressure to our cruise altitude, so it will, the environmental control will kick in and do its job properly. We put the fuel pump number 1 to on, and that's used by the APU, which is a portent of what we're going to do next. So APU goes to start. If I can click on it, the click spots are quite small on the 737. So you can see that needle just moved. That's the exhaust gas temperature of the auxiliary power unit. So if we go outside the aeroplane and scoot round to the back, in the back of the aeroplane there's a small jet engine, and it's used to provide electrical power and compressed air. And the compressed air is used to spin up the engines. So you can hear it winding up, and there comes the heat out of the back of it. So you can see that exhaust gas temperature is shooting up. It will go up to about 7 and then fall to about 4. When it comes down to about 4, the middle light on the bus transfer section will light up, meaning we can switch away from ground power to using the electricity being generated by the auxiliary power unit. So here it comes. The light will come on, hopefully. There we go. So then we can switch over to using power from the APU. So you saw a flicker then in the electric system. And obviously ground power is saying it's available, it's not actually being used now. So I'm just checking my checklist to make sure I don't miss anything obvious out. We've done the fuel pump, we've shown the APU on, we've done the bus transfer. So the anti-collision lights can go to on. That's a little bit out of step actually. So control 3 comes down to the FMC, and we go to the menu page, FS Actions, Ground Services, and we remove or release the ground power. So it's disconnecting it from the aeroplane. So wait for it to say connect, which means it's disconnected. Or request, sorry. Then control 6 will take us back overhead. We don't have to switch the ground power off. When we switched over the crossfeed to use the APU, it automatically disconnected the ground power. Okay, so what do we do next? All of the fuel pumps can come on now. We're getting ready to start the aeroplane up. Okay, so fuel pumps are all on. The APU bleed can come on. So this is routing the compressed air from the APU. You can see the pressure is building up, having done that. So this is the compressed air we will use to start the engines. So do we need to push back? Well, we will anyway. So control 3. So we're going to remove the chocks. So removing the chocks is a trigger to close the door and pull the vehicles away. We'll press Shift and P on the key. Whoa, I think we've broken the simulator there. We've found a bug. That's awesome. That's brilliant. Let's press Shift P now. No, okay, it's pushing back without the tractor. That's interesting. Okay, that's a bug we've just discovered. I pressed Shift and P too early and we took the stairs with us. Isn't it interesting the things you find when you're showing people things? Anyway. So we'll just stop there for the moment. In reality, in the real world, we need to put the tow brakes back on to engage the parking brake. Yeah, in the real world, obviously there's a conversation with the tractor, it will push you back and then you'll be given permission to start the engines during the pushback, but this always feels a little bit clunky in the sim when you're doing everything single-handed. So how do you start the engines? You go and turn the ignition system to either the left or the right system. You can use either for either engine. I think they alternate them. There's two systems. They just alternate them to save on wear and tear basically. So you switch the engine to GRD, and then down here you will see the N2 number. This is the compressor speed inside the gas turbine, or compressor shaft speed. When it gets to 25%, you can advance the start lever for the engine, and that will introduce fuel and ignite it. So 22, 23, 24, 25, and advance the start lever and it will carry on past, and you'll see the exhaust gas temperature come up, the fuel flow increase, and the fan speed increase. Now, did I switch on the... I didn't do the centre tanks. I'm just going to do them. It's such a common thing that I forget to switch on the centre tanks. Okay, so if you look overhead, the engine start switch will go back to off all on its own. So again, we don't have to do this, but we can flick to the left ignition system for the left engine and come down and have a look. You can see the N2's coming up on engine number 1 now. So that's the compressor shaft speed. When it gets to 25%, '24, 25. Oh, sim's just frozen. Give it a few seconds and it should wake back up, hopefully. Oh, there we go. So, advance the start lever on engine number 1. And you can hear that happening. So ignition's happened. Engine is coming up to speed. Excellent. So let's, while we're waiting for that, we'll put the FMC back on the legs page. And you should see this will flick back to off all on its own. So we'll use this, look at this from overhead so we can see it all happening. There it goes. So ignition is finished. Okay. So following doing that, we don't have to use the APU for power anymore. So we can cross-feed over to the engines now. So the auxiliary power unit is not being used, it can be switched off, and so can the APU bleed. The APU has done its job. We can go and turn on the hydraulic pumps now. And we can turn the packs to auto. So this is the environmental control, so pressurizing the cabin. If you turn on the packs before you've started the engines, you won't be able to start them, because the compressed air needed to start the engines will have been used by the packs, and there won't be enough pressure to spin the engines up, or at least it will be very slow at doing it. So we've done the hydraulic pumps, we've done the packs, taxi lights to on. We're almost there. We can essentially taxi out to the runway now. So to release the parking brake, we hold the toe brakes on and it should let go on its own. There we go. We need to go and put the flaps to takeoff position. So I'm just going to go and see, yep, 10 degrees, that's perfect. So if we ease the throttles forwards, we can clear that warning from earlier. Warnings do not clear themselves. Interesting, when the controls flicked earlier, the auto throttle arm came off. We want to go this way, don't we? So I'm just going to double check around that everything has stayed where we originally put it, because that was that. You saw that control glitch earlier. So I'm just making sure the MCP looks correct. There are no warnings on the screens anywhere. TCAS is off, which is correct. We'll get to the holding point of the runway and then we'll do our final checks of bits and pieces to do. So basically we'll be looking to go and put the position lights to strobe, landing lights to on. Then we'll line up and go for toga mode essentially on the throttles. So while we're taxiing out, we can prepare the anti-skid as well to rejected takeoff mode. So all that really does is pressurizes the brake cylinders ready to stop in a hurry if we need to. I think it might actually kick in the spoilers as well. I'd have to double check that. Or maybe I'm thinking of the Airbus there. Okay, so we'll just sit here on the parking brake for a second and go through the final few bits and pieces. So landing lights can come on, the position lights go from steady to strobe. And I'm going to do TCAS early so I don't have to think about it when we're in flight. We're going to put TCAS, now normally at takeoff you'd have TA only. We're going to use TARA just for today because there's no traffic around by design. So once TCAS is on, we have to hold the tow brake on to release the parking brake. So once TCAS is on, you press the TFC button and you get the range rings and the dotted pattern. So anything that flies into that dotted pattern, if you're in TARA, will cause the autopilot to react. So it will change its attitude, you know, to climb or descend accordingly. So we've done the barometric pressure. This is the point where I become paranoid that I've missed something. So just before we do get going, I'm going to have a short talk about the guidance systems. So I'm going to hold it on the tow brakes while we're sat here. We are using lateral navigation mode, which means the guidance is going to follow the GPS. Okay? If you were wanted to do radio navigation, you would be using VOR lock mode, and the course and the nav radio frequencies would come into play. We're only going to use the nav radio today for landing. So that will become much more obvious when we get there. Okay, so we're sat here on the runway. To use there's a button on the throttles here called the toga button. I'm going to press it, and it pre-configures the aeroplane to just go for it. So you can see it's lit up with toga on the display.
80 knots.
So we're waiting for the rotate speed that we programmed in to appear on the indicated airspeed ribbon, at which point we will rotate. So I'm just trying to get everything in view so we can do things quickly. It helps if you stay in the middle of the runway. Let's rotate. That crosswind is quite dramatic. Okay, so gear can come up straight away. And we are going to try that trick of, yeah, we can't do the autopilot just yet, look. There we go, it's come on. So it just shows below a certain altitude the autopilot won't work. The speed has disappeared because we're in VNAV mode. So it's climbing out, it's going incredibly steeply. So raise the flaps. I was quite late with the flaps there, but so once the gear is up, we can put the gear back to the off position. So if you look at the flight plan, it needs to be 4,000 feet for SS03. That's really high actually, and above 3,000 for 06. So no wonder it was absolutely climbing like a crazy thing. It's quite a steep requirement for this takeoff, for this standard instrument departure. So let's have a look at that on Navigraph to see how we are doing. So we're tracking fairly cleanly around the corner. You can see that happening here. So VNAV is kicking in, look. It's controlling the speed, and it's only taking us to 4,000 feet, even though we've asked for 15,000. So it's obeying the restrictions of the programmed flight plan. So in the same way we are doing this on the way out, we'll have to do the same on the way down. So while we're in cruise, we will set... let's go and have a look at the flight plan. So when we come into COA, on part of the standard terminal arrival route, we need to be 5,000 feet essentially. That's interesting, isn't it? So we will target 5,000 when we get to cruise altitude. So the rejected takeoff switch can be switched off now, and we're waiting now to change the barometric pressure when we get to the transition altitude. So if we go and increase the range on this, it's the Clacton VOR, isn't it? So once we get past Clacton, which is 30 miles out, look, at the moment, once we get there we'll be able to switch over. So let's go and have a little look at that standard instrument departure again while we're flying out. So at the moment VNAV is obeying all of these rules, so max 250 knots, 4,000 feet, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, hold at 250 knots until collect and then start climbing. Once we get through 10,000 we can accelerate. So it's quite a compressed route, but that's good because it keeps us busy. Okay, can you notice over here there's some blue lines around the outside? This is one of the options in the FMC. The blue line, even though it's on auto throttle, is where my throttles are. So it gives you a good chance of lining them up before you take it out of auto throttle, which is really useful if you're going to do a manual landing. A glitch has just happened there with my controls. It put the speed brake on. I didn't command that. Okay, so we're just basically babysitting the aeroplane now, waiting to get to collector. Should we have a look outside? It's funny, isn't it? We spend all this time inside the cockpit fiddling with it and don't ever look outside at this amazing simulation. It is absolutely incredible, especially when the weather's not good. Absolutely fantastic. Okay. So you can see it's coming through, it's climbing now for 5,000 feet, so the engines are accelerating. Obviously it's holding 250 knots, so nose is coming up. Or it's trying to hold 250 knots, look, it's not doing a great job at it. It's got VNAV path. You can see the green banana of when it thinks it's going to reach the altitude, and that's zooming off because it's levelling out at 5,000 feet, so we're not going to get to the cruise altitude. That's all that really means, because there's another restriction in our way. We can use the MCDUs, the FMCs independently of each other. So if you go to menu, FMC, we can put this on the progress page, for example, which shows you a slightly different set of data than the legs page, which is quite good. So you get the ETA into the destination all the time, calculated for you. Obviously the navigation display is independent as well, which really comes into its own during landing, so you can have nav on the co-pilot side and the landing system data on the pilot side, or app, or approach as it says here. Okay. So yeah, reiterating what I talked about on the runway, the emails that I received, there was some confusion around operating the aeroplane in different modes. The master control panel controls what mode the autopilot is running in. If you're in LNAV mode, it's following the waypoints from a lateral point of view, so a steering point of view. If you're in VOR lock mode, then you are following the course and the radio beacon in the same way that you would, you know, with a Cessna or something. So the Boeing can do exactly the same thing, but commonly you would use GPS during your flights and then only switch to the radios for ILS. So the aeroplane can still do lateral navigation on the GPS, but it can have the signal from the ILS, and then when you go to approach mode, it will be using the radio signal at the appropriate point. It will kick in and use it. So we'll see that happen, and I'll explain when we get there what's going on with that. So essentially the aeroplane will automatically switch over from using GPS to using the radio signal from the ILS, but only if you're in approach mode. And it will only do it in specific circumstances. But yeah, I'll explain it when we get there. Okay. Let's shorten the range up on this a little bit. So we're just coming up to Clacton. So you should see the aeroplane start climbing. As soon as we get above 6,000 feet, we have to change the barometric pressure to standard. And the reason for that, if we look at the Clacton sheet, the transition altitude is 6,000 feet. Above the transition altitude, you use standard barometric pressure, so all aircraft are measuring their altitude in the same way as each other. Okay, so we're making the turn. We should start climbing anytime soon, because the next target is flight level 135 at Logan. Okay, so we're climbing. So we go to standard barometric pressure. It says STD at the bottom of the altitude ribbon there, and we're climbing for 15,000 feet. So the green banana will probably appear if we zoom out far enough to show it. There it is. This airplane's very powerful. So our next thing to do is, when we get to 10,000 feet, is turn the landing lights off. It's a convention with commercial aircraft that they use landing lights at all times below 10,000 feet above sea level. I'm not sure how that works with high altitude airports like Denver or Columbia, places like that, where obviously you can have ground level above 10,000 feet. So yeah, that convention would go out the window a little bit. That'd be interesting to find out a bit more about that. So aircraft's climbing at 2,800 feet a minute. It's running engines at 94% on the fans, 93% on N2. That's related to that the cost index that we entered. If we'd entered a higher cost index, we could probably have had a higher N2 percentage and therefore a higher N1 percentage as well. This coming up to 10,000, 9,700, 9,800, 9,900, and the landing lights come off. You can see top of climb is marked there, about 15 miles out from us. So quite often VNAV will do like a parabolic curve. It won't do a straight climb. It will soften the climb out as you get to higher altitude. You can probably see that on a little nav map actually. If we pull up the, if we exaggerate this view, it's already stepped the climb. So we're probably just about get to top of climb before, and don't take no notice of these estimates. I'm using a 737 MAX that somebody else made, so it's not going to be accurate. One day I'll do a video on how to record performance data for Little Nav Map. It's very straightforward, so you can make your own aircraft profiles. Okay. Oh, there's a few ships there in the. We're out over the sea now, aren't we? Yeah, crossing the channel towards mainland Europe. Let's have a look from outside. So I've got the Seafront Simulations add-on installed, which is why we can see those boats out there. Should we turn the head tracking on? There we go. So I can zoom across the cockpit and sit up so I can actually see outside. So what hardware have we got in this version of the 737? I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the various liveries of the 737 that come out of the box accurately represent real aircraft, and you can swap out various facets of them. So in this one, for example, we've got, I think I've been tinkering with it, so we've actually got the quarter lights above us, which would have been used for astronavigation years ago. So quite often they're filled in on more modern aircraft because they don't do that anymore. But you can also get an overhead display fitted into the 737, and it's an option. So, you can retrofit your own aircraft in the PMDG 737s to do that kind of thing. Okay, we're just coming up to cruise altitude. So the interesting thing here is we'll get to top of climb, which is just coming. So the aeroplane will level out and it will manage its speed. You'll see the throttles come off. There they go. I'm just going to turn head tracking off. I often look like a bit like a nodding dog when I'm explaining things, trying to aim the camera with my head. So we're at the cruise altitude and it's maxing out the speed now. Now it's nice and stable. You can see the throttles coming off though to try and balance it so we're not accelerating or decelerating. So what we can do is go and set the altitude we want to come down to. So we're going to set 5,000 feet, which is what we want to be down to by the time we get to Koa. The other thing we can busy ourselves with while we're cruising along is going and setting up the ILS for the end of the route. So let's go and have a look at the approach plate. So the interesting information for us is the ILS parameters. So we want 236 degrees on the course, 110.9 on the radios. So we'll go and change the course. And remember, we're using GPS, we're not using the course at the moment. So 236. Do it on both sides. Now notice the speed is coming off. The aeroplane knows it's got to descend. And it's going to be looking at these numbers here and bringing the speed down as we descend down. And it will try to do it without using the spoilers. If it can't, we will intervene. Obviously the wind may play a factor in that. Oh yes, we were going to put the radio frequency in for the ILS. So it's 110.9 for the ILS into Rotterdam. So here's the radio, 110.90. Switch that to be the active frequency. And same on the other side, 110.90. Switch that to be active. Now depending on the fit out, as I said, of the 737, this is a very modern looking nav radio. You do see some very old ones with dials instead of buttons. And by the same token, you might get a completely different FMC. They look broadly similar. Not FM, yes, MCP, sorry. You might get a very different MCP. They look similar, but different. The buttons are in the same places, they're just different shapes, different machining techniques. So each panel of the 737 can be hot swapped out for a different make. Because I think it's Honeywell and somebody else that made the various different ones. So you can see we are descending. So that was dependent on us setting the altitude while we were in cruise before we got to top of descent. If you miss it, it's on you to get back below the track. So you might have to use level change and spoilers, for example. You can see the wind readout. It's quite windy up here, isn't it? So we'll see how the aeroplane does on descending. Let's increase the range. Got quite a way to go. There's Koa. Look, it's 40 miles out. We're aiming to get to 5,000 feet. It's going to get there early. Well, it thinks it is at the moment, but we have some decelerating to do. Look, we're doing 315 knots. We need to get down to 250 at 10,000 feet, which will extend that out quite significantly. But let's see if it can do it without us getting involved. So when we get to 10,000, it will try and decelerate, and it won't be able to carry on going down. So at the moment it thinks we'll get to 5,000 feet by Kedgit, but that's not going to happen. Yeah, there we go, look. So it's decelerating. or it's trying to, and even doing that bit of deceleration has shot the target straight off the chart for when we'll get to 5,000. And it's now trying to get the speed down to 240. So we can help it. We're going to throw the spoilers out and help it get rid of that speed. So coming down to 10,000 feet, it won't go below 10,000 feet until it gets to 250 knots. So we'll carry on helping it until we get to 250. Now you can see there's a little marker that's appeared. If that's in the middle, it means we're on the plan basically to descend in time. If it isn't, you know, if it's above us, then we'll come down too early. If it's below us, we've missed it. Okay, so I've come off the spoilers, so I've given the aeroplane some breathing room artificially. And we're just approaching 10,000 feet, so it's not going to harm us to go and put the landing lights on now. Why are they not working? So we're down below 250. It's aiming for 240, probably to give itself 10 knots worth of wiggle room. Let's have a look at the standard terminal arrival route and see if it's got 240 mandated. It may have it. No, it's just got the altitudes there, look. So that's the aeroplane that's chosen 240, probably to give itself 10 knots worth of flex, essentially. So it should be bringing the throttles back up, but it's obviously using pitch. It should be going for 5,000 though. It's interesting that it hasn't started to. It's following the vertical plan here. Here we go. So it's suddenly got steeper. So it all looks very calm when the computer does it, but if you fly it by hand, you will be chasing this marker for the descent. Okay, so we're a little way out yet. Gonna get to do some sightseeing on the way in by the look of it. Should be nice. Oh, there's some big ships down there, should we have a look? This is the nice thing about autopilot, isn't it? You can do some sightseeing if you're not obsessing over it. So the one thing I'm not going to know today, off the top of my head, is the flap speeds for the 737. But I do know we could actually help our descent by putting the flaps out to the first stage, because it will obviously introduce some drag. But I don't think we need to yet. We'll see what the airplane does with no flaps and no brakes. So it's coming in nice and efficiently. This is the bottom of the operational flight plan we're looking at there, isn't it, with the winds aloft. It's very cool. So what's the arrival weather? So as we descend, have we come down through the transition altitude yet? We're at 8,000 feet. What's the transition altitude at the destination? It'll be on the approach plate, won't it? 3,000 feet. That's really low, actually. So we need to go and have a look briefly. I'm good at this, aren't I? Let's straighten that back up, shall we? Let's pull up the information, the weather on Rotterdam. Open airport, go to the weather. And the QNH is 1025 hectopascals, 32.7 inches. We are operating in inches, so we want to use 32.7. But we don't have to change to that until we get to 3,000 feet. Which is remarkable, really. Very low transition level. Oh, we've got a container ship down there in the bay. Of course, the port of Rotterdam is quite a big famous one, isn't it? You can see there's a whole queue of boats going in and out. So yeah, seafront simulations is very good for that, by the way. So if I do turn this on and have a look outside while we're killing some time here, it does produce some nice effects, you know, where you see the shipping lanes at the famous ports around the world. It's very good. And the boats move and they have wakes, which does make a big difference. Anyway, we're just approaching Koa. We're coming down towards 5,000 feet. I'm not sure it's going to do it in time, you know. We'll leave it be though. Let it do it as it wants to do it. So that klaxon is telling us we're within 1,000 feet of our target altitude. It might trigger at 800 feet. It does on some aeroplanes. The klaxon is at 800, not 1,000, or even 900. It varies from aircraft to aircraft. So we've got the landing lights on. Transition height altitude was 3,000. And what was, just to remind ourselves, we'll pull up the ILS because we're coming around this corner at Koa, and then we'll come round onto it. 32.7. Okay, the aeroplane's turning. So we've already got the course set to the runway direction. We've already got the radios tuned for the ILS. We're now flying kind of a racetrack pattern, although a very long one. So we're stabilising at 5,000 feet and about 240 knots. And then we'll come down to 3,000 feet for Keko. So if we increase the range on this, it's quite a long leg in, isn't it? Yeah, everything's happening in a few minutes' time. Obviously, as we zoom in, that will unclutter itself, or declutter itself. So we need to go and set this, I'd forgotten, so we've deviated. So let's do a level change to get us down to 3,000. Oh no, we don't, sorry, I tell a lie, I've done that wrong. Let's put altitude hold on at 6,000. There we go, seeing very quickly how to fix things here. Oh, 5,000 wasn't it, sorry. So I've just noticed, yeah, we need to be below 6,000 at Dofmu. And then Keko is 3,000. I'd forgotten. So we're getting quite slow. You can see on the indicated airspeed ribbon the lowest speed we can go is within sight, so I'm going to start to extend the flaps. So if I go to the first step on my controller, it's going to, yeah, you can see the maximum speed for us now is 250. But as the flaps extend, and it takes them a little while, I think they'll go to 2 degrees, then the minimum will drop away as the flaps extend. You can see it dropping away there to 160-ish. So let's go for 3,000 feet now. Oh no, it's still 6,000, isn't it? But we should, if following VNAV though, remember, we should be able to just say 3,000 and it will get on with it. When we went to altitude hold, obviously it cancelled VNAV, so I've just switched VNAV back on. So it's going to come and bring this line back in, all on its own. So it just goes to show you can reprogram as you fly. It won't hurt anything. Obviously, having the flaps down is helping us now because we've got some drag. So it's expediting these level changes that are going on. So it's below 6,000 at Doffmu, so we don't have to stay at 6,000. Then we need to be at 3,000 for Kako, but Kako isn't for a while yet. Let's have a look on the chart. Yeah, it's just out of the screen at the moment. So the reason for this is the ideal altitude to come into the ILS feathers, which are typically about 8 miles long, is 2,500 feet above the airfield elevation. So if we go and have a look at that on a little nav map, so there's the feathers, and if we pull up the information for the airport, we can see the elevation is actually below sea level. It's at -2, so 2,800 feet would be the maximum to come into the feathers. They actually want us just above 2,000, yeah, and above 2,000 here. So we'll see what VNAV does with that. Because the reason for this, and I said we'd come back to this, when you fly into the ILS beam, approach mode will not engage unless you fly into the beam from underneath. So essentially we fly straight and level below the height of the beam and fly into it. Yeah, so the beam goes down towards the runway at 3 degrees. So at 8 miles out, it's at about 2,800 feet, or sorry, 2,500 feet. So then if we come in at below 2,500 feet into that 8 mile range, we will be below the beam. So we can fly straight and level and then hit the beam with approach mode on in advance. And when approach mode is on, when we cross through the ILS beam, it will begin descending automatically. So remember, at the moment we're using LNAV and VNAV. The airplane's having a bit of a mare with, I guess the wind is shifting, isn't it? And it's affecting the lift and therefore and the speed of the aeroplane, so it's chasing things a little bit on the indicated airspeed. So essentially we could just say go for 2,000 feet, which we know is our target for the ILS, but the aeroplane, because it's on VNAV, is going to follow the restrictions. Yeah, it will only go for 3,000 at Kako, 2,000 at Rewick. You just need to be ahead of the aeroplane on the altitude targets if you are using VNAV. If you're doing it yourself, you need to kind of do your mental arithmetic and figure things out for your descent. You generally work on the principle of 3 times the distance for the height. So say if you need to lose 10,000 feet, you're looking at 30 miles. So 30,000 feet, looking at 90 miles. I think that works out on a descent rate of about 1,800 feet a minute. I can't remember off the top of my head. So the aeroplane has got some pretty major turbulence going on, hasn't it? Should we put the flaps down another stage? It's interesting that the target airspeeds here are 240, which was possible with the flaps at 2 degrees, but it wasn't going to do it. It's been going much more slowly than that, which is fine. We can look outside and enjoy the scenery on the way in. So where are we in relation to the airfield? We're just coming up to Doffmu. So the aeroplane's probably just behind there somewhere, over there. I've not got any scenery add-ons installed today, so this is stock flight simulator all the way. Should turn the head tracking on and we can have a look around. It's a windy day, that windmill's ripping around, isn't it? So let's go and refresh our memory looking at the approach plate. So we're just coming in here towards Dofmu. So the aeroplane will make the final turn, and when we get established or facing the airfield, we should be at 2,000 feet by Atwit. I think it said, or was it Rewick? Let's have a look. Rewick 2,000 feet. So yeah, we can prepare for landing well in advance. We've got lots of time on this approach. I can see a beacon of some description out there, blinking away. There's Kako, 15 miles out. I'm just going to straighten myself up in the cockpit. So you can see the ladder is still here with the vertical position, so we're absolutely on the profile at the moment. So below 3,000, above 2,000 at Kako. So you can see the airplane's wiggling around a little bit, but it is starting to think about descending. Doesn't want to yet. So I'm guessing this is the city of Rotterdam over here that we're about to pass by. We're going to get a guided tour and circle the city by the look of it. If we have a look on the map, yeah, we're going to go right around the city. Very cool. Let's have a look from outside. Something that might be fascinating, again, this is me turning this into a test flight. If I raise the flaps, will it accelerate us back out towards... Oh, we're aiming for 190 anyway. So you know, we're absolutely right on the speed. Look, it wants 190 knots. And we've got the flaps configured, so we're right the way in between. Look how notice how narrow the minimum and maximum speeds are on the flaps in the 737-800. It's a bit of a so-and-so for that. You actually find yourself kind of threading a needle on approach quite often. On everything, make sure everything's still working. So once we're engaged on the ILS and once we have approach mode on, we will be able to engage both autopilots at the same time. You can only do that when you have approach mode on, as far as I'm aware. There's the port of Rotterdam. There's the airfield over there. Obviously we're going to fly out about 10 miles this way, turn around and come back, and then land on that nice smooth patch of real estate over there. There's the city. Should we zoom in? I'm not sure if it's going to load in the assets when you're this far away. Yeah, it doesn't really load it in. Look, it looks like it's made of plasticine. Okay. So I think the real key with this is, yeah, we are still following LNAV and VNAV. So this is following the GPS track. We have not switched over to use radio navigation yet. Changing this knob does nothing about the guidance. This is all about the instrumentation, or what we're seeing. This is about what the plane is doing. This is what we are showing on the screens to interpret what it's doing. So if we go to approach mode, for example, that gives us the HSI with the glide slope, but it doesn't actually do anything to the aeroplane. So typically in flight you would use map mode. You would use plan mode to double check your route looks correct. Okay, I'm going to turn head tracking off for a moment, so I can sit up in my seat and get comfortable without the screen jumping around all over the place.
2500.
Yeah, so earlier when I was talking about the speeds, I just wondered if raising the flaps would cause VNAV to adjust the speeds upwards. I don't know if it's that clever. So it's gently coming down to 2,000 feet. It does seem tremendously low, doesn't it? Let's reduce this to 10 miles range. So you can see the extended line there for the centre line of the runway. You can actually draw vectors on the map in the 737. You can draw radius lines as well. It's very good. I'm not going to get into it today. That's not the point of why we're here. We're here to see the switch over between the GPS and the radio. So something we haven't done, which again is an easily forgotten thing when you're just messing around in a simulator, is to tell people to go and put their seatbelts on. Although it was on auto, so it would have done that automatically, that's fine. Okay, we're turning in. So let's go and put the head tracking on, and we can look in around the corner. Very cool, isn't it? Got 20 knot winds going on, but they're coming from the runway direction, so we're going to be directly into a headwind on the way in, which will help us enormously actually. So what we're looking for is to pick up the ILS beam. So the radio is tuned in, Okay, so we've got 110.9 both sides. We've got 236 degrees both sides, which is going to be that direction. And you can see, if we go to approach mode now, there's the ILS beam. Yeah? That's the localizer. So that's us in relation to the runway. This is where it pays to have both sides working. Yeah, so we're just approaching the centre line. So that's the centre line direction relative to us, and we're off to the left of it at the moment. And we're below the glide slope, and that's crucial. That's gone solid. That means we are now engaged on it. We have captured it essentially, or we're about to capture it. So if we go to approach mode, and the aeroplane will make that turn itself, it would have anyway. Now notice we have a solid diamond here as well. So notice we're holding 2,000 feet. But that won't be the case all the way. Auto throttle is still armed. Notice there's no numbers, it's in landing mode, or in approach mode, sorry. So notice here as well, you've got glide slope has shown up, meaning it can see the glide slope. There's the runway. So we're going to go and put the wheels down. Just go watch that happen. So we should see another oh no, we've got control of speed now, that's good. So let's take it down to 160. Trying to get there just before the flaps do. Otherwise we'll overspeed the flaps. We're good. So the autopilot is still flying it. It's guiding it down the glide slope for us. I hate doing this, I hate using it. I'm going to use auto land today for the first time in a long time. We've got single channel at the moment. Let's see if it doesn't do it, we'll have to get to a decision height. The symbology will change. Let's press F. I'm not sure that you can... Oh, we haven't got both autopilots on. So now we've got both on. This symbology may change and go to land. There we go, flare mode. Yes, good. That means the airplane will land itself. So we can now just play with the speeds. So let's get down to 150 and go full flaps. Notice how narrow this window is between the maximum speed and the
1,000.
The minimum when the flaps are in transit. So it does pay, if you've got a piece of paper nearby, to have the speeds printed out. Obviously the real crews know them, they learn them. So the airplane's tracking the localizer and the glide slope on its own. So all remains for us to do is to be ready to take over when we hit the ground. We can put the auto brake on as well. So let's
500.
watch it come in. So notice it's saying here it can't make it for whatever reason.
400. 300. Airspeed full. Airspeed full.
So the aeroplane almost got itself into trouble then. I'm hovering over the disconnect button.
200.
is it going to make a complete pig's ear of it? Let's watch it from outside. It did it really nicely, didn't it? Right, I'm taking over to steer it. So autopilot off. Cancel the alarm. We didn't even need the reversers there, look. So the auto throttle has come off with the autopilot coming off. So it's such a long runway, we didn't even need the reversers. A little bit of wheel brakes and it stopped us quite smartly. So coming off the runway, we need to take off the landing lights. The strobes need to go back to solid. Or the position light, sorry. No, strobe, isn't it? Yeah. Need to go back to solid instead of strobing. And that was pretty much it. So we put our faith in the automatic landing system there. So the real trick there was we went to approach mode, and then while we were beneath the glide slope, flying in towards it, and then we switched on the second autopilot, which gave us auto land. Okay, so the flaps can come back up. Obviously on a short runway you have a lot more that you do with using the reversers, the brakes, the spoilers, you know, so you would do all sorts to slow yourself down in a huge hurry. So while you are taxiing back, it's often useful to go and turn the APU back on in case you haven't got a GPU at the gate. So we'll take the next right, but we can obviously watch the exhaust gas temperature of the APU as it spins back up. It's showing low pressure at the moment, look. But the ideal is that by the time you get to the gate you've got the APU up and running, so you can actually switch over to it instead of using the main engines, so you can shut the engines down as soon as you get to the gate. Rotterdam, The Hague Airport. It's quite well modelled, isn't it? This must have been a specially treated one. I'm not going for a particular parking area, by the way, I'm just tootling around being nosy. So you can see the APU is available on the bus transfer section up there, so we'll put the parking brake on, so we hold the toe brake and then we can lift the parking brake and then we can let go of the toe brake. So as we said, we've got the APU up and running, so rather than use the engines we can use the APU, and then we can pull back the start switches, he says, famous last words, on the engines, kill the engines and you won't get any alarms, because we've already taken power generation over to the APU. Okay, I'm not going to go through the whole shutdown sequence, but that's just the main one to be aware of. Obviously the other thing you can do is, while you've got the engine still on idle, you could go and connect the GPU through the FMC and then switch to ground power up here and then do the same trick and turn the engines off. But at this point we're essentially cold and dark. Well, not cold and dark, but nearly there. There you go. So hopefully you found that interesting. I know it's retreading a lot of ground we've covered before, but I just wanted to really focus on that switch over between GPS navigation and the radio for the ILS at the last moment. and that the navigation display has nothing to do with the guidance. It's really just showing you what's going on. Okay, anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon.